This is the On Blast Podcast, Week 3 NFL Picks. My name is Sheldon Alexander, once again joined by my guy, Mr. Matt Russell. Week 3 of the NFL. We're still here. We're still handing out picks. Everything is still going all right. I mean, I haven't lost everything yet. No, I'm joking. We are doing all right here on the On Blast Podcast, back to entertain you with more Week 3 NFL picks. Mr. Russell, how are you doing after another wild weekend of the NFL season?
I'm okay. I think a lot of people, sort of follow along with, what I do, what we do, et cetera, are probably looking for some answers after the Cleveland Browns against the New York Jets happened on Sunday. I certainly was myself. And it's funny how the spectrum or the sort of specter of Survivor can just like rain a black cloud on an otherwise really, really good day. Now, you haven't mentioned what your record was. I'm sure you had to have done pretty well this past week. I know I did 4-1 for me on the Circa Millions contest. No, you didn't, not so much. Oh, okay.
I'm going to the control room scrambles to get the graphic up here.
Oh.
Last week, 7-9. 17 and 15 overall. We had some interesting games last week. We'll say that. There's some interesting swings, we'll say, last week.
And
but
honestly,
hey,
that's such a great point, because it's like, yeah, all of these games, man, could go either way. Like, I'm sitting there and the early games, my two big plays, we talked about it last week, right? Giants and Carolina. Was big into the Panthers. Also, throughout the week, I tweeted this out on Sunday that I just became more and more kind of into the Dolphins as the injury report for the Ravens sort of piled up. And then I'm sitting there going man, I think the Panthers are going to be good here. Dolphins are atrocious. The defense is awful. Tua looks a little shook. Yada. And then we get into the second half and everything swings. I don't really know why we even bother watching the first half of these games, other than the fact that we're just wildly addicted to the entire thing. And I guess the first halves of the games on Monday night were the only reason that we would watch, either half of those games. So, I'm just looking at it and I'm like, all right, just tell me when this stops, because, I just mentioned the Browns game. You know what? We did it, man. We got that game home, that, or we should have gotten that game home. That game was a win. My buddies and I are texting, nice work on surviving, on to next week, as Chubb runs it into the end zone. And it's wait a second, why did he run into the end zone? This guy is famous, quite literally famous for running out of bounds at the 1 yard line so as to end the game a couple of years ago. And now all of a sudden, the one guy who at least has proven he knows how the clock works just doesn't do it. Or so he had us believe. And then you still go, okay, it's going to be a 2-touchdown lead here. And then, your guy, Cade York, misses the extra point a week after he won the game with a game-winning 57-yard field goal. And you're my guy's making them from 57. He can't make them from 30. And you're just sort of going how is this actually happening? And of course, a 66-yard touchdown. The one thing you can't do is let anybody get behind you, and the Browns defense just, red carpets Davis into the end zone. And then, of course, why would you ever get an onside kick? Of course, we always know the stats. They always fire up the stats, an 8% chance for an onside kick. And it's no, don't worry, they got this. And of course, once they had that, you knew they were going to march down the field. So apologies to anybody who tried to roll with us with our Survivor pick. You lose a lot of these games. We talk about bad beats against the spread, and at the end of the day, it's just one loss, right? Whether it's in a contest or whether it's, in your bankroll, so to speak. But the Survivor, right? The Survivor is the one that you cannot come back from. And so that just has this black cloud over the rest of, for me, what was a pretty decent Sunday.
Yeah, we will get to, just the misery that I felt on last Sunday, as I'm a Niners fan and watching Trey Lance go down and Jimmy Garoppolo come back. It just, not that I thought Trey Lance was going to be the answer and they're going to win the Super Bowl, but at least there was a hope. Jimmy G, I feel like I know what I'm going to get with Jimmy G. So that was an interesting Sunday for me as a Niners fan, and as, the gambling. I was hanging on for dear life to try to get to 7-9, just with some of those wild swings that happened last week, which we'll get to individually. But again, for people who might be new to what we do here on this the On Blast podcast, NFL picks. I'm going to come out here. I'm going to try to give you my take, the Joe Public take, what I'm thinking in terms of which way I'm leaning for each and every NFL game for the entire season. My guy Matt is here, and he's going to give us the information and education on where the line is, where it was, and where it could be going heading into kickoff. The goal is just try to give everyone kind of a lean no matter what on each and every game. Matt's going to tell me where he thinks I'm way off, where I'm wrong, if my thoughts are off, which, happens a lot, but that's the fun of what we do here. As mentioned last week, I went a resounding, I'm going to keep track of it because that's the goal of the show here. 7-9 last week, 17-15 overall, and we're going to keep tabs on it. We are. I promise you, that's what we will do here on this podcast. An interesting stat that I saw, though, was that through the first 32 NFL games against the spread, underdogs 16, favorites 16.
Yeah. Not an easy deal here.
What are we doing here? It just shows like the fun of everything that we're doing here. But we begin with the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Cleveland Browns, ladies and gentlemen. Pittsburgh Steelers, Cleveland Browns, Thursday night football action. And I look up and I see the Steelers as 4.5-point underdogs at the Cleveland Browns. And I'm looking at this line and I'm just thinking, okay, should I be taking Jacoby Brissett and the Browns by 4.5 points against anybody, much less in a divisional game and on a short week? Are the Steelers just that bad? Or, sorry, I said on a short week. It's not a short week. I don't know where I got.
Well, it's a short week.
Oh, it's a short week for both. It's a short week for both. Yes. Okay. See, I'm talking myself in circles here. This game just got me rattled early. It's got me rattled early already because, I'm either taking Jacoby Brissett favored by 4.5 points. Like, that just seems strange to me. Are the Steelers that bad because I'm leaning on the Steelers in the points here, or am I just bitter because Nick Chubb just didn't go down last week and I'm mad at the Browns? And I've been mad at the Browns from the start of the season, and the player to not be named that just has this dark cloud over me that as a Joe Public dude, I'm going to remain that black cloud over this Cleveland Browns franchise for the whole season. And part of me loved the fact that their coach brought out his kids to stand with them on the sidelines in anticipation of the victory. And then they had to watch the most epic collapse of their dad's career.
Yeah.
Yes. All of those things.
And no less, we have to look at that stupid elf in the middle of the field for 3.5 hours.
Who thought that was a good idea?
I don't know, man. And honestly, like that was part of our discussion when we were talking about that survivor pick, going like, it feels like you shouldn't take a team that has just an elf right in the middle of the field. Okay, so let's get into the brass tacks and all of this. Okay, like what, based on the market and everything that we've learned, now we're up to 2 data points on each team, right? We can sort of do our cross-referencing on point spreads and all that sort of thing. The Browns should be about a 3.5-point favorite here, so it's a 4.5-point spread. It was a 5.5-point spread, and there was even some 6s available. So immediate sort of mea culpa here. I grabbed the +6 with the Steelers early on in the week at -115, available at a relatively prominent sportsbook. But now we're down to 4.5, and now it's your favorite little zone there, right? The no man's land territory.
Woo!
You mentioned Jacoby Brissett, and that's almost one of the many sort of frustrating things about that game against the Jets is the reason, or one of the reasons to not take the Jets beyond the fact that there's an elf in the middle of the field is Jacoby Brissett. Like, oh man, I'm going to trust my survivor pick with Jacoby Brissett. Like, what are we thinking? Like, what an idiot or whatever. It's like, not the issue, man. Like, wasn't the issue against the Panthers, wasn't the issue on Sunday. And so, okay, are we just now like believers in Jacoby Brissett as a quarterback because he had 2 great games? It's like, well, yeah, maybe like in order to win you enough games to kind of tread water here before that dude comes back later on in the season. But like, I also don't really want to lay points with this guy because, that game was a 3-point game. Like, it's easy for me to say, listen, we got there. We had a 2-touchdown lead. We had that game should have ended on 7 one way or another, whether it was, recovering an onside kick, making an extra point, or just Chubb falling down and never getting into that end zone in the first place. And if that was the case, then yeah, like we'd be pretty high on the Browns. Like, yep, took care of business, covered against the Jets, like da. So I get why we see this line move up, because the Steelers, you look at them, it's like, okay, this has not been impressive whatsoever. But here I've got, a little bit of statistical action here for you. You'll recall the last time these two teams played on a Thursday night. Little quiz for you. What happened? What of significance happened when the Browns faced the Steelers on Thursday night that set the NFL world quite literally a Twitter when a late game circumstance happened?
Was that Myles Garrett?
That's your man's Myles Garrett. Just walloping.
Remind me when we're done to tell you something about that. No, I'm not even making a joke. I can't say it. I actually cannot say it over a microphone in public. But yes, wow, is all I'll say.
The After Dark version of the On Blast Podcast Network. Mm-hmm. The last time that happened, that was obviously Cleveland winning that game handily, which was even more surprising that Myles Garrett would wallop a man over the head with his own helmet. But that, of course, was Mason Rudolph. Since then, these two teams have played each other 5 times, including the playoffs. And the Steelers have outgained the Browns in every single one of those games. And you go, well, Mitch Trubisky wasn't the quarterback. Well, Duck Hodges was the quarterback in one of those games. Mason Rudolph was again back the quarterback. And by the way, Ben Roethlisberger's decrepit, athleticism was the quarterback for a handful of those games, including a playoff loss where they ended up having 500 yards against this Browns defense. This Browns defense, for me, through these 2 games has been wildly disappointing. That was the thing going into last week's game. It's like, okay, well, the Browns defense is going to be good enough against Joe Flacco that we don't need to worry about Jacoby Brissett just kind of being okay. Turned out Brissett was decent and the defense was atrocious. They're in the 20s in basically every important category. Again, it's only 2 weeks, but it's also only the Jets and the Panthers. So when we talk about stats that over the course of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, basically early on in the season, whether it's me or somebody else talking about these teams, this team's this against the run and this against the pass, I feel like we always need to be adding a line. We always, are we grading this on a curve? Right. Yeah. We'll use a couple examples a little later on about teams that don't have great numbers, but they've played really good teams. This is a team that doesn't have good numbers and they haven't played really good teams. And all of a sudden we're going to just trust this team now to win by margin. And yeah, maybe they do, but it's not like they have had this, had the Steelers number here in the last few years. And you go, okay, well, TJ Watt's not going to play. But I think the Steelers are more defensively than just TJ Watt. Yeah, they would need TJ Watt against a particularly good team. They probably could have used him last week against the Patriots, but the Patriots have a better defense than the Browns do. And so that game, listen, it was a 3-point game. That game is always going to be close and low scoring. I think this game is going to be close and low scoring. And so, yeah, like maybe the Browns end up winning this game by 7 or whatever, but like, wouldn't shock me if the Steelers did the thing where they get the defensive touchdown or special teams touchdown or blocked field goal or something along those lines, right? That turns the game. Maybe not necessarily for a Steelers win. I came on last week and said the Chargers money line was the bet that I was looking to make for the Chiefs. Luckily, they at least covered, but didn't cash our first leg of our round robin money line parlay, which was a bummer. But like, were we wrong? I think the Chargers were the better team that day. They just didn't have anybody who could catch a ball defensively to, make an interception. And of course, ironically, the one time the Chiefs had a chance to catch a ball for an interception, they ran it back 99 yards. But like, that's the, this sort of the razor's edge thinness of these results, right? Like it can go either way at any time. And so when we're talking about value here, like, no, I wouldn't be shocked if the Steelers, they win this game all the time. These divisional road games after a loss, like this is just what the Steelers do. So yeah, maybe they don't, but like money line's fine by me here. Plus 4.5 is fine by me here when you're talking about the Steelers, because this Browns defense, I don't think is going to like drive Mitch Trubisky crazy by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Give me the Steelers plus 4.5. I'm on board here for the Thursday night action here between the Steelers and the Browns. But let's keep things moving here with the Buffalo Bills, who will be 5.5-point road favorites at the Miami Dolphins. And Buffalo Bills Mafia is rolling. Interesting stat here for you. In week 1, the Bills beat the Rams by 21. In week 2, they beat the Titans by 34. There have been 201 instances in NFL history of a team facing a playoff team from the previous season in each of their first 2 games. The Bills are plus 55, which is the largest point differential of any team. That's monster size. I get it. I understand the bandwagon. The Bills are rolling.
Let's cancel the season.
With
Super
that
Bowl.
said,
just mail it over to Buffalo.
That said, you know what I'm going to say here. I think you know me well enough by now.
Yeah.
This is prime Vegas zone. I am on the Dolphins. Prime hot game in Miami in September. I don't quite think Miami will win. I'm not out here saying, hey, take them on the money line, all that fun stuff, but I definitely think they can keep it spicy. And I'm here for the Tyreek Hill talking trash. So give me the points. Dolphins plus 5.5. This isn't even about the crazy finish that the Dolphins had last week, because you can't replicate that. That was an insane finish, an insane game. But in terms of just these 2 teams in this matchup, where they're meeting up, 5.5 points. Give me the Dolphins plus the points. What say you, my friend?
Yeah, we had an all-time. I might as well just go walk into traffic 30 seconds into the 1:00 games the other day when the Dolphins gave up the kick return, the opening kick return to the Baltimore Ravens to go down 7-0. Meanwhile, as the aforementioned Giants and Panthers game, the Panthers got the kickoff and managed to fumble it right to the Giants. They ended up losing by 3, the amount of points that the Giants turned that fumble into. And for a long time, it looked like the Dolphins were going to probably just be screwed by the fact that they had given themselves this deficit to start with, because you don't want Tua playing from behind, right? Or so we believed. But at least now he's shown us that he can do it. And so you go, okay, now we have something. And you say okay, they don't want to do that against the Bills by any means. And it's not because of the comeback sort of, they're not going to ride the momentum of the comeback into a victory here. But it's really more about the difference of this Dolphins team versus teams past, right? It's the speed element. Yeah. The fact they can get this thing done with top level talent in the way that last year they're running Myles Gaskin out of the backfield and Devontae Parker, hoping that that's still a thing. Ask the Patriots how much of a thing Devontae Parker might actually be. So this is a different team. And you're right. The circumstance here, you mentioned the heat of Miami. I'm sorry, that's a real thing. I refuse to believe that that's not going to be a real thing, because Buffalo has had the most comfy situations for these 2 games that they've had, right? Indoor game against LA, a team coming off of winning the Super Bowl. I think, you and I talked about that looked like 2 teams. One team that had lost with, in overtime the year before and had been thinking about it for months. And the other team that was celebrating getting the, their banner up, basically.
Champagning and campaigning,
right? In a dome situation, which is always going to favor the Bills. The irony, of course, is that, come December, they're out in the snow. This Bills team, as we've talked about in years past, would probably be better off in a dome. Then they get a week and a half off and then get this Titans team. Let's just be honest, this Titan team's shit. It's just not a good team. And they just ain't it at this point, right? Yeah. And we'll look back on that AFC 1 seed that the Titans won last year, and we're just going to be retrospectively just shocked that ever happened. And so what's the issue with the Bills? How are they going to lose this game? Because that's kind of the issue. Well, one, what if Gabriel Davis isn't ready to go? That is going to be a factor. No, it wasn't against the Titans, because guess what? The Titans had arguably their best defensive back out for that game, but nobody seemed to really care about that because it doesn't affect fantasy football or anything along those lines, or anytime touchdown markets, for example. We thought we had a pretty good number on Isaiah McKenzie as a side note. But now they go to Miami and they're okay, Xavier Howard and Diggs, that'll probably be a pretty good matchup. Howard didn't have a particularly good game against Baltimore, but I don't think he's all of a sudden just garbage. I think he's still a pretty good corner. I think that could be a pretty good matchup. But on the other side of the ball, Buffalo has been without Trey White and have rookies back there in the secondary. And what happened against the Rams is the Rams only had 1 decent receiver. Obviously, that was Cooper Kupp, and he went for 140 yards. So it's not they shut that down, right? And then we got the Titans with Ryan Tannehill and just really kind of a tough group of wide receivers at this point, right? I think Burks is eventually going to be something here, and he looked like the biggest, danger out there. But that's not Tyreek Hill. That's not Jalen Waddle. That's not even Mike Gesicki out for that Titans team. So like, this is a better offense right now than they have faced. This is tougher conditions on a shorter week than they've had. And all we've seen is the line go up because they beat up on the Titans. Right. Yeah. And again, that was a pretty close game against the Rams, by the way. Right. We talked about that tie game at halftime, one touchdown, one score game going into the fourth quarter. So like the score obviously is a little misleading from that first game. So, you mentioned you not necessarily think the Dolphins are going to win this game. Like I kind of do, especially from a price perspective. And we talk about how like, oh, okay, got Browns +6. Now it's 4.5. I'll mea culpa this one on the opposite side of things. I grabbed the Dolphins +4.5 before the games even started last week because if I like the Dolphins going into that Ravens game, I'm like, well, if I'm right about the Dolphins now, then this number is going to come down because I don't see how anybody could be that impressed by what Buffalo does against Tennessee, 24 hours in advance. Now they go and they absolutely
here we are
and they hammer the Titans, which is fine. Like that's they did what they were supposed to do. They were 10-point favorites in the NFL. Like you should probably win that game by at least 2 scores, and obviously it got a little out of hand late. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I'm sitting here with 4.5 because if it goes to 5, I'm not going to beat myself up. If it goes to 5.5, I'm not going to beat myself up. But if this drops to 4 or God forbid 3.5 or 3, then I'm going to be bummed out. So let's grab the 4.5 while we can. Well, you know what? Here we are, and it's 5.5, and I lost the key number of 5. Obviously, as we know, just based on numbers, key numbers, and all that sort of thing, we're going to want to wait and see if we can get 6 here out there for the Dolphins. That's obviously a big number when it comes to if this game happens to go to overtime and all of that sort of thing, right? That's just good betting. And the way that people are just mailing the Super Bowl here to Buffalo, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw some 6s, maybe a +6, -115, something out there that's worth a play on the Dolphins here. But again, I think they're live to win this game. The more recent matchups, Josh Allen's like 7-1 against the Dolphins in recent memory. Well, that wasn't the Mike McDaniel offense. That wasn't the Tyreek Hill version of this team. Like it's just a completely different team. And by the way, only one of those games, and it was a 3-point Buffalo win, came in September in Miami, right? In these conditions that we sort of assume are going to kind of be a factor in this game.
Yeah, you mentioned Mike McDaniel's a scheme. That's a Niners thing. He comes from that Shanahan playbook, and we know that sometimes, is Tua really that much better, or is he just throwing to wide open fast dudes?
Sure.
That have matchups because they're getting mismatches on linebackers. Don't want to get too deep into the football talk. We got a whole year to do that and see that, but like it's just different so far. Can they keep it up? We'll see. First big boy matchup. I like it a lot. Let's keep things moving here to the Packers at the Bucks. Bucks 1.5-point favorites here, and the Bucks are beaten up. Mike Evans tried to beat up Marshon Lattimore last week as well. And he'll be suspended again. Yes, for the 3rd time, was it? At least,
as far as we know.
But yes, the Bucks are favored by 1.5 points at home. They will be without Mike Evans, who was suspended for 1 game. So they're out here on the scrap heap picking up Cole Beasley on the practice squad here.
Yeah.
This is basically a pick'em game. I'm not sure if I'm buying like either of these two teams, really, to be honest. It's tough, right? These are both teams led by veteran quarterbacks that will be better as the season goes along. At this point, though, the Packers beat the Bears like they always do, even though the Bears did score on that touchdown that they didn't get called a touchdown, but story for another day. As we mentioned on last week's pod, we're always here arguing about the backdoor cover for the Bears against the Packers. And guess what was going on again? The Bears struggling for a backdoor cover against the Packers. But I will stay focused here. I'll stay focused. I'll reel myself back in here.
Lock in.
I'm riding with Brady. I think Fournette will be able to run the ball. Whichever receivers are in the lineup, whether it's Perryman or no, is that who? Perryman.
Yeah, man, you're Brashad, your boy
Brashad Perryman. Whether it's Perryman that'll be in there. Hopefully, maybe can we get a Julio sighting back? Maybe, hopefully. I don't know, but I don't think they'll be relying on Cole World Beasley here. But whoever it is, Tom Brady, it'll be a Scotty Miller hookup at some point. Give me the Brady laying 1.5 points at home, basically a pick'em game. I am on the Bucks.
Yeah, we might see a -1 here. Obviously, kind of once you get under a field goal, you can sort of play with the numbers here a little bit. If -1.5 is -110, you might be able to get -1 at -115, something along those lines. It's funny. My numbers come out to 2.5 in this game. That's where the number actually the number started 3. So I understand why people were gobbling up the +3 on Rodgers, and that the number would go to 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the Mike Evans thing means like we have to knock another point off of the spread here. Again, 2.5, 1.5, like that's such a fine margin. Like that doesn't really mean all that much most of the time from a win probability standpoint. But I'm with you. I mean, this Buccaneers defense is like absolutely outrageous, and like they've shown that they can do it against Rodgers, whether it was the playoffs a couple years ago or that regular season game where they absolutely trounced them. And then the thing that, I think you're right about the Fournette running the football thing, because I mean, that's what the Bears were able to do over and over and over again against the Packers, even though like, why would you ever be afraid of Justin Fields throwing the ball? And like, Justin Fields has only thrown the ball 15 times. We'll talk about this in a little bit, like all season long, or at least completed 15 passes all season long.
Also, the Bucks will just sneak it. They won't go on 4th down and start from the shotgun on 4th and like inches.
Also
just
true.
Saying,
as
just
Chris
saying.
Collinsworth literally mentioned Tom Brady sneaking it when Justin Fields did not do that. So
I'm not bitter though. Not bitter.
No, and listen, I'm delighted. I had the Packers. We talked about the first half, but I had them full game as well, and I decided to dance with the devil of the backdoor cover, and it actually went my way. Which again, the fine,
16 and 16. We mentioned it. 16 and 16
it's just
favorites. Underdogs.
like that's the thing about even just people like bragging about their record. It's like, man, like you just got lucky in a short period of time. Like we'll talk about this over the course of 100. I was going to say 162 game season, but it's much more than that. I'm watching too much baseball lately with the Toronto Blue Jays. So back to the point here. I mean, yes, obviously Julio Jones coming back would be really nice. Chris Godwin coming back, really nice. I heard somebody refer to it as a cry for help signing Cole Beasley. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds right to me. Obviously offense didn't look great against the Saints. Like I still don't really know how the Saints didn't win that game on Sunday, let alone cover the 3 points. But yeah, man, like the funny thing is the total has like dove down from like 50 to like 41 in this game because everybody just sort of realized like, no, this isn't that game. This isn't the game that we've seen from these two teams over these last few years. This is going to be that grindy, type of a game here. But if the Packers, who knew the Bears were going to run the football, can't stop them running the football, and didn't do particularly well against the run against Minnesota the week before, and then we saw Minnesota's run game, which is completely vacant on Monday, like, okay, if the one thing that I think can be relied on here offensively is the Buccaneers run game, and on the other side of things, the Buccaneers defense, and we're getting under a field goal. Yeah, man, I think I got to be with that too, right? Like, again, kudos to the Packers for beating the Bears at home on a Sunday night, but like, that's not necessarily proving anything to me. Like, I'll bet into it. I will, I bet the Packers, and like, again, like we said, we won with that, but like, it doesn't mean it's going to prove anything to me. So, like I said, 2.5 I thought was the right number. It's down to 1.5 because I think people are a little too excited here about the Packers. Two-headed monster run game. And Akeem Hicks is going to be out for this game for the Buccaneers, but again, the Buccaneers have more than enough talent to replace him, especially with Vita Vea, right? He's sort of an extra when it comes to how good this Buccaneers defense is.
Imagine that, right? An extra. Bucks -1.5. Yeah, I'm definitely on board with that. We will keep things moving though here. Yep. Let's go to the Lions at the Vikings. Vikings at home, favored by 6. This one seems like everyone will be on the Lions. I'm kind of like I'm feeling like the recency bias here of you just saw Kirk Cousins suck again in prime time, and plus people love betting on the Lions, and you keep seeing the Man Campbell clips of firing up the team and hey Skip and all that fun stuff. It's fun to cheer for the Lions. I can't lie to you. It seems like a sucker bet to me as I'm staring at it. And I'm saying this while admitting that I will be the sucker betting on the Lions +6. I know the Vikings play better at home. The short week has me leaning Lions, but there's been line movement in this game, right?
Well, certainly from projections, right? Like the concept
Okay.
of this game should have been probably over 7. That's not going to surprise anybody, right? But
Mhm.
like the interesting thing here isn't necessarily from the line movement in this game. It's from the line movement in the Lions game from the last game, right? Where
Okay.
remember we were on here talking about how the Lions were actually favored and like look at
Mhm.
this, and we were just sort of sitting here going like, God, I'm really not really sure what they did to be favorites in this game. And then the injury report came out and it started to go, okay, like now it's not looking all that great for the Lions, and the Commanders started taking money, and then it got down to a pick 'em, and even the Commanders were sort of a favorite in a way where they were like minus 115 on the money line to minus 105 for the Lions. So I don't know that they officially actually closed as favorites in this game. So maybe the streak is still going. And then Lions come out and they basically like house the Commanders in the first half of that game, taking like a
Mhm.
22-0 lead. And so now like it's almost, verified, if you will, that the Lions should have been the favorites in that game and that the Lions should, have this whole new rating. And I'm bumping them up. We're, talking about the old, out of 100 rating. I've got them up to 39 out of 100. Maybe they should be in the 40s. Maybe they should be that even team. I'm going to need to see a little bit more. But early in the season, we're trying to move these teams as fast as we can without overreacting, right? Like that's the balance in all of this. We're going to overreact, or are we going to react appropriately and get ahead of the marketplace? And so with that point spread closing around Pick'em last week to the Commanders, and the Vikings only 2.5-point underdogs to the Eagles on Monday night, this number should probably be over 7. I have a
Mhm.
7.5 from a market standpoint. And again, even if I bump up the Lions a little more, like I can't get below 7.
Mhm.
So now you're looking at a -6. I grab -5.5 because I'm like, well, if I wait and it goes to 5 or 4.5, not a big deal. But if I wait and it goes to 6, that becomes a big deal.
Yeah.
I want that backup plan if it happens to go to overtime. And so, you talked about the overreaction or the reaction to Cousins on prime time. Like, isn't that what he does? Right? Like
Yep.
he stinks it up in prime time, and everybody goes like, "Oh, this Vikings team's the same old Vikings team," and then they show up at 1 o'clock on Sunday. It's your 7th favorite game of the slate,
The
and
red
then you
zone
look
channel
over.
pops on and it's like 103 and there's Justin Jefferson running free for a touchdown.
Yeah, he's just grittying the bleep out of things in the end zone. And like, yeah, you look up and it's 21-3 at halftime. And like, yeah, the Vikings probably end up giving up 2 touchdowns in the second half, and you start having to sweat whether they're actually going to cover the number. But like, they play much better. And like, I don't know why that is. Now, I'm not going to throw out my love or early love here for Kevin O'Connell because they lost that game against the Eagles in a pretty tough environment, kicking myself for not sort of bumping up the Eagles' home field advantage in that one game and, making that sort of a value play under a field goal. But whatever, you lose a game every once in a while. So yeah, like I'm on the Vikings here. If you told me the Lions won this game outright, like I'm not going to be shocked. We saw that last year. They probably should have won both games last year. But again, I'm not going to penalize Kevin O'Connell for the deeds, or the misdeeds of you, if you will, of the Mike Zimmer era. So
Yeah.
I think this is a bounce back spot for the Vikings here, right? Like I think if this schedule was flipped and this game was played in week 2 and not in week 3, it is up over a touchdown, right?
I
And so
got
like
you.
there just hasn't been enough over the course of these last 2 weeks. I mean, the Commanders worked themselves right back into that game where like they could have actually come back and won that game on Sunday. So yeah, -5.5 play for me, -6. Obviously, that opens the door for a push. And if that ends up landing on 6 and is a push, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, that would be the same result if you took the Lions +6, which it seems like you're leaning to do. Again, I just think from a numbers play, this line has to be closer to 7. Give me the Vikings here, though I'm not exactly thrilled about it. But why would you ever be thrilled with betting on the Vikings or Kirk Cousins?
Totally with you there. I got you. Give me the Lions. And I'm leaning Lions here. But let's keep things moving here as we got the Ravens as 3-point favorites in New England against the Patriots. I'm not sure what to think here. Old school Pats, this would be an easy home dog bet for me, but I still don't trust this Pats team as much as I trust Pats teams of the past. Or at least I can say I trust them a lot less than I trust Lamar and the Ravens at this point. I'll lay the 3 points, but I don't love it. At least I feel like Lamar will make plays. on both sides, as we've seen him get real loose with the ball, is something that we've talked about year in and year out on this pod. But I feel like Lamar will make plays. I'm not sure what I'm getting from the Pats on a week-to-week basis. Nelson Aguilar out here looking like Randy Moss. And it's like, where's that all the time? Like, why don't they do that a little more? I just don't know what to make of the Pats at all. So because of that, I will reluctantly lay the 3 points with the Ravens on the road here.
Yeah, I mean,
I like your reaction there.
Okay, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, I can't be against that, right? You know, everybody knows I'm high on Lamar Jackson. I'm high on the Ravens sort of as an organization and being able to, like, you know, get it done even with some relatively dire circumstances. But man, wasn't that just, that was a tough scene last week, man.
Very tough.
That was a tough scene. Coverage breakdowns, guys blaming each other in the secondary, et cetera, right? It wasn't a lack of talent. It was a lack of communication and understanding of, like, who's got who and where. Guys weren't getting beat one-on-one. They were getting beat 11 on
60-minute game, old cliche, 60-minute game.
But you know what I mean, though, right? Like, it wasn't a talent thing where it was like, oh, this guy's just getting torched by this guy. It was like, no, actually, that guy's just running free because the safety in the corner can't figure out who's supposed to get the depth play on that offensive play. And so, you know, the Patriots, can they do that? Like, probably, you know what I mean? They don't have the speed necessarily of the Dolphins, but, like, they have Mac Jones at this point. Like, it hasn't been pretty. But again, like, I think the Steelers defense is pretty good. I mean, you know, we just talked about how one of the reasons we like the Dolphins at home against the Bills is because of the circumstance of playing in Miami in September. Like, okay, well, then we have to give the Patriots a little bit of a nudge there because of that situation, right? We have to downgrade, you know, that game a little bit and almost upgrade the Patriots a little bit. So, you know, they obviously have been playing on the road these first two games. At home, it's a little bit of a different story. My numbers came out to about 1.5 points for the Ravens. And so you go, okay, well, why is it 3? Well, if it makes sense to you, sort of perception-wise, that it goes up to 3, then to me, that's actually a good spot to take the Patriots, right? Like, if you understand why the market is making you pay an extra 1.5, and in this case, on the key number of 3, then to me, that makes sense to grab the Patriots.
I got you.
I hope that makes sense to people.
No,
right?
No, I
Where
got
it's
you.
Like, if you can see why nobody would want the Patriots, and therefore we have to, you know, jack the price up here on the Ravens, then that probably means the Patriots are a pretty good idea to bet this week. So I'll be on the Patriots +3 here. I am just sort of watching the market right now because it's easy to say, okay, it's going to be 3. It's going to plaster 3. I've heard people say that it's going to go down to 2.5 and grab the 3 now. And then I'm looking over at other sites and you're getting +3 at, like, even money, which suggests that, like, maybe it's starting to lean to a 3.5. Now, it's a big move off of 3. Either way, whether it goes to -3.5 or it goes to -2.5, like, moving off of 3 in the NFL is literally the biggest. We saw was the Falcons and Rams last week have a game that probably should have lined up on 7, and it didn't because they went for 2 down 14. We saw Cleveland and the Jets. Probably that game should have landed 7, but we saw an extra point. These are the things that happen to get games off of 7 and make 7 less of a key number in the NFL. Whereas 3 is 3, man. Like, 3 is the key number in the NFL. So to get this number off of 3 really means something. I'm just going to be watching to make sure that I can't get +3.5, but I'll be on +3.
Okay. Very interesting game. And again, it's a very tough game because I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the Pats are. So I'm super interested to see how this one plays out, but I will lay the 3 points with the Ravens. Keep things moving here. We pick up the pace a little here. We got the Bengals at the Jets. Bengals, 4.5-point favorites. I have no idea what's going on with the Bengals. They're 0-2. Seems like a great time to be facing the Jets, or is it? How much are we buying this Jets comeback? And Joe Flacco throwing bombs out here has this game comfortably in the Vegas zone.
It was fascinating. It was fascinating last week.
I feel like I have to take the Bengals though.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, right? Like, Vegas zone, are they really going to fall to 0-3 while losing to the Jets again, like last year, if we remember how crazy that game was? losing the Cooper Rush's Cowboys and then Joe Flacco's Jets back-to-back weeks. I know it's not that easy, but I just can't do it. I got to take the Bengals laying the 4.5 points here.
Yeah, it does sort of feel a little now or never-y here for the Bengals, right? Like you can't go 0-3 with losses, like you mentioned, to the Cowboys and the Bengals, and of course a division loss in week 1 to the Steelers, right? Like, but you don't just get to decide that because you really, really need to win. You don't just get to. Now, what's one of our rules? If you're jumping and dancing on the sidelines after a win, we're probably going to fade you the next week. Shout out to the Seattle Seahawks last week. So the Jets are that, right? Like they, Garrett Wilson's doing like a flip when they get the onside kick. And of course, obviously Robert Saleh's so excited. What would this number have been if Nick Chubb just falls down, if the onside kick doesn't go down, if the Brown, all of those things that happen, if they don't happen, numbers got to be closer to 6.5. It has to be where the Ravens were at the Jets just 2 weeks ago, because we have the Ravens around where the Bengals are from a rating standpoint.
I like it.
And just because 2 games have gone by doesn't mean we have to sort of throw all that concept of Bengals and Ravens being about the same, right? I don't think that's I think it's insane to say like, yeah, actually both teams, whether you want to move them both down or keep them where they are, like they both exist, together, tied together in that AFC North from a rating standpoint. So yeah, like why isn't the 6.5 the way that it, the Ravens were a couple weeks ago? Well, because we got excited because the Jets won a game, which again, alternative universe, 21 years, 2,000 games of that situation, all of the stats that you've seen on Twitter over the last like half week here, all of those things. If it just in that universe just lines up with all those other games, it's -6 at the very least, right? But instead it's -4.5. Obviously, part of that had to do with the Bengals not beating the Cowboys last week, which we thought from a value standpoint is something that was a possibility.
You were on that.
From a value standpoint, we got to be on the Bengals. Now, if they end up going 0-3 or they win by obviously not covering this game, all right, you know what? Then we're probably going to be looking at the Bengals a lot differently, like in an official sort of capacity here, right? But if they win the same way that the Ravens won a couple of weeks ago, then yeah, okay, then we solidify where we think they are relative to the Ravens. We are confirmed, if you will, on our rating for this team. So this is just sort of like a do or die type deal where it's like we're getting 1.5, maybe 2 of value here on a favorite, which again isn't something that happens very often, but again did with San Francisco last week and a couple other teams, and I think that happens again this week.
Good old zigzag nature of the NFL. Gotta love it, right?
Totally.
Gotta love it. Keep things moving here. We got the Jags at the Chargers. Chargers at home as 7-point favorites, laying a touchdown. Seems like a lot of points, but the Jags remain one of my most frustrating teams to bet on. No matter which side I'm on, they appear to do the opposite. We got a banged up Justin Herbert, but he's still Justin Herbert. My question to you, are the Jags spicy or are the Colts really bad? I don't know. I know you're going to say that's not really how things work here. We're talking the gambling side of it. I'm not sure, but I will say that I'm on the Jags and I don't like it at all.
So okay, this number at 7 is sort of an in-between number, right? We talked last year about in-between numbers when quarterbacks were, we weren't sure whether the quarterback was supposed to be in the lineup, right? Because a healthy Justin Herbert who doesn't have fractured rib cartilage or whatever, which to me just sounds like fractured ribs.
And a doctor that's being sued for injuring their previous quarterback.
Yeah, who's just wielding a needle unruly, right? It's like, oh, they'll just shoot him up before the game. It's like, does that sound like a thing we want Justin Herbert involved in any way, shape, or form, people?
Crazy.
No. If Justin Herbert's healthy and fine, right, this number's probably over a touchdown, right? It's probably 8. If we find out tomorrow, nope, he's out, Chase Daniel is in, well, you're not going to make the Jags favorites all of a sudden, right? No. But you are going to drop this number probably closer to 3. I think 3 is a little too low. So let's say it's probably about 3.5 or 4. So something in between 4 and 8 that's going to be pretty safe is just putting this number on 7 because there's a high possibility, A, that it goes one way or another, but B, that it just lands on 7, regardless of what sort of happens in, with regards to these quarterbacks. So that's why this number 7 So it's either a little high or a little low, depending on,
depends on what happens.
It depends on what happens. So for me to just sit here and say like, oh yeah, man, Jags +7 for sure. It's more just like, okay, what do you believe as far as this injury to Herbert? What does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
And so if he doesn't play, then yeah, like +7's really good value, and you're probably going to want to jump on that right now. You probably want to jump on the money line that's like +250 or even a little higher than that right now, because we might be looking at Chase Daniel, and like for as much money as Chase Daniel has made as a backup quarterback and never actually playing, like we've seen some Chase Daniel, like he's not very good. And this is a Chargers team that, like, listen, they're going to screw enough stuff up here for the Jags to cover a +7, even maybe if Herbert plays. Like, it's not like if you bet +7 right now, Herbert plays, you just have no chance of winning, right? Like, that's obviously not the case. You're just probably not getting the best of the number, because the number's probably going to go up 7.5, 8, right? Like, when it gets announced, if it gets announced that Herbert's playing, the number goes up, right? It doesn't mean that that's correct. It's just how human beings react to good news, in this case for the Chargers, right?
Yeah.
But by the way, how do we know Justin Herbert's sleeping all that well this week? How do we know that he's even practicing this week? Like, the preparation element has to be a factor. So when this number is 7, and I say like if he was healthy, it would go to 8, 8.5. Yeah, but he's not going to be healthy. He might play, but he's not going to be healthy. He's not going to be prepared. And by the way, he might not make it through the game. And now you're looking at Chase Daniel coming in to the middle of a game instead of having a week of prep. So there's a bunch of different reasons why this line is never going to get to, or never should get to 7.5 or 8. And we haven't even gotten to the fact that the Jags shut out a team last week. And I know we might think that the Colts are awful. Who knows, right? It's still only been 2 games, but they still shut out an NFL team with actual players. And so like the only way this moves in a way that like is going to make sense is if it comes down off of 7, because Herbert's, not okay to go in this game. So like, yeah, man, you might as well just grab the Jags right now and kind of hope for the best, because there's a lot of ways this can go badly for the Chargers, and there's not a ton of ways that this can go badly for the Jags from a news standpoint to change the market in this, right? But it is important to know that if all things were equal, this line would be over 7.
I like it. You made me feel a lot more comfortable in terms of taking the Jags for sure. But as we keep things moving here, I don't know how comfortable I am in this one. Rams -3.5 on the road in Arizona. Seems like a lot of points. The Rams offense doesn't really scare me, but I'm also not trying to be over-influenced by video game Kyler Murray. 3.5 points would normally have me taking the home dog, but I feel like the Rams defense, more importantly, their defensive line, will hopefully do a better job of keeping Kyler under wraps. Maybe those video game moments don't happen as much to save the game. I don't know. I don't really like it, but I'm going to lay to 3.5 points with the Rams.
Lest we forget, man, the NFC West carousel, right?
You're right.
A tried and true system that we've used for years. And how does the carousel work? Well, San Francisco owns the Rams. The Rams own the Cardinals. The Cardinals own the Seahawks, and the Seahawks owned the 49ers. Now, the Seahawks basically forfeited their ownership of the 49ers once Russell Wilson left. Right. And when I say own, obviously, we're not talking wins necessarily, but certainly covers and like surprising results. Right. Because we've had scenarios where, the 49ers weren't supposed to do much against the vaunted Rams, and then they either knock them off or stay close enough to cover a point spread and yada, yada, yada. So what's surprising to me here is that this line is only 3.5. Now, my numbers come out to 4.4 in the market. And as you can imagine, I have the Cardinals rated a little bit lower than that. And they pulled that comeback off against the Raiders. But again, I like to sit there at certain points in a game, whether it's halftime, middle of the third quarter, fourth quarter, whatever, and be like, how do I feel about a team right this second? Yeah. Because how many seconds of that Cardinals Raiders game did you really like what the Cardinals were doing? Even when they were coming back, fourth downs and Murray's just on his own running around, et cetera, et cetera. If the Rams, under the sort of cycle of the NFC West, if the premise of that is that they've handled Kyler Murray, which of course they did in the playoffs and they did last year, if that's the premise, then what am I supposed to be afraid of? when it comes to the Cardinals here. And I don't even really love the Rams all that much, as you guys probably know from the first couple of weeks of this podcast. So, but what I'm seeing here is this line opening where I thought it was supposed to open, around 4 to 4.5. And now it's down to 3.5. And like, it's funny how, your mentals work where I'm like, well, if I could get a -3, like what would be the price I'd want to pay for the Rams -3 in this game? And I'm like, well, given that it's such a key number, -120 feels like a price that I would probably just say, you know what, fine, I'll take -120. Well, there's a -122 available out there in an offshore sports book. And it's funny how like the $2, if you will, on the price, like changes it for him. Like, oh, okay, well, no, I said 120. I can't dare pay -122 on this. And like, yeah, there's a bunch of time left here. I don't know if this is a fake where early in the week, organizations, groups will bet, the Cardinals to try to get this number down to 3, where when the limits rise later on in the week, then boom, they hammer the Rams. That's certainly how I would play it if there was an indication that we could get a -3 here. So we'll see. Maybe people are actually liking the Cardinals in this game, and I just don't see how that's possible, especially, in the first 6 weeks of the season as we wait for DeAndre Hopkins to come back. This to me is just rely on the old tried, tested, and true NFC cycle here, man. Like this is Rams on the road for me, -3.5, and hopefully maybe we can get -3 because this line should be 4.5.
Let's go Rams. Keep things moving here. We got the Raiders on the road, 2-point favorites in Tennessee against the Titans. 2 0-2 teams going head to head. I guess I'm going to go with the Raiders here. I mean, their offense at some point has to get it going on a consistent basis. Also, maybe Hunter Renfrow wants to not fumble in key spots with the game on the line. Maybe that might help. Not sure. Meanwhile, the Titans. Oof, what can we say about the Titans? Give me the Raiders here. I'll lay the points and the 2 points with the Raiders.
Okay. I get it. Like, it has not looked pretty for the Titans, right? But like, also,
yeah,
it kind of never does.
True.
Right?
Fair.
And like,
fair.
And this game is going to be the 7th, most exciting game or the most, interesting game on that 1 o'clock schedule. I think it's the 1 o'clock. Yeah, of course, because it's in Tennessee. The Titans are just going to win this game, right? Because the Raiders are that team that will like show up. They should be the road favorite. I'm not even saying the numbers off particularly. I do have the Titans favored in this game because I haven't knocked the Titans like down to like sub average, right? Like if average again is 50 out of 100, I haven't gone below 50 yet with the Titans. Though I can understand after you watch them get housed by the Bills and you watch them blow that game to the Giants. But like, by the way, they still had a pretty decent lead in that Giants game. They're not necessarily going to blow that type of a lead all the time. The Raiders literally just blew a lead at home to the Cardinals. What are we getting that excited about from this Raiders team, right? Like it hasn't, the excitement that we're supposed to feel about the Raiders, about Devontae Adams and Josh McDaniels and all of these sorts of things, like that hasn't really shown up just yet in actual play on the field, right? Loss, obviously, on the road to the Chargers and, of course, blowing that game to the Cards. This feels like that Raiders team that's like, it's going to be a battle. Mike Vrabel's scrappy group, like Tannehill's going to save his career for the millionth time by playing a really good game. Derrick Henry is going to be much better than the 25 yards. We were on his under 88 on Monday, and he had 25. Shouts to Derrick Henry for not making that a sweat in any way, shape, or form. But like, I don't think the Titans are just dead. And honestly, if they lose this game, like, yeah, maybe they are just flat out dead. This is a game that a team that stinks but has some heart and has and I don't want to say reputation, but experience. Like this is a game that they win. Okay. And the Titans are that, and the Raiders just aren't just yet. You know what I mean? Like if this was, oh man, the Titans are going against the Chiefs or, even the Chargers or, there's a handful of teams where you just go like, okay, like, yeah, that team's just like notably better and they're not on both sides of the ball. I don't think that's the case here, right? I think the Titans can be problematic defensively for the Raiders. And I think they can be, like, strangely enough, problematically offensively against the Raiders here. So it's one of those where you're like, man, it doesn't look good. It's probably not going to look good. But like, I think the Titans at like plus money here on the money line to win this game. I think that's pretty good value.
Okay. And maybe Josh McDaniels just isn't a good coach. Could be a thing. Could be a thing. I don't know. Keep things moving here. I'm very interested to hear your take on this game. Chiefs minus 6.5 at the Colts. Can't lie, I'm going to be the sucker that's going to take the Chiefs here to cover on less than a TD, but I'm pretty sure you know that because you're familiar with my work. The Chiefs to cover a TD on the road. The Colts, I get it. This has to be a game where they show signs of life.
Yeah.
But I'm just looking at the Chiefs offense to roll here, and it might be one where they get up big and just shut it down. And, you know, Matt Ryan doing his Matt Ryan thing here with the backdoor cover. But I'm willing to accept that. That opportunity, that chance. But I'm laying the points on the road, 6.5 with the Chiefs. I know what you're going to say, but I'm here to hear it anyways.
You're 100% right. You know exactly what I'm going to say, and it's exactly what I'm going to say. There was a 7 out there earlier this week, and listen, I might rue this come Sunday, but I couldn't have been giddier to hit the Colts plus 7 when it was available on Monday. And plus 6.5 is outrageous too. Plus 6 would be outrageous, but people are still willing to pay it. Like, whether it's the old saying of the Chiefs tax, right, where they're always just a little bit higher than they should be, and that, you know, ends up costing them the cover, even though they win and all of that sort of thing. Like, yeah, that exists. But again, Chiefs destroyed the Cardinals, a team that we just talked about. Don't really think that much of. And then honestly, weren't the better team on Thursday. I think even Patrick Mahomes kind of admitted that they got away with one in that game. But because there's kind of nobody else to fill that role of the number 2 team in the NFL, right? You've got the Bills, and I write my weekly column showing people like what the odds makers, how they're rating these teams based on the point spreads that have existed. Like, the Bills are like 5 rating points clear of anybody else. And nobody really wants to give the other team sort of in that milieu, if you will, like any credit, and rightly so. But there's one team that's 2-0 out of that group, right? Out of the Packers and the Chargers and the Rams and the, you know, Buccaneers. Well, the Buccaneers are 2-0 too, but like obviously haven't looked that good, especially last week. Like, it's the Chiefs. And so people just go, okay, Chiefs are number 2. And it's almost like because we refuse to like believe that the Bills are that much better. And again, that might be true. We're dragging the Chiefs up in our ratings, right? As like, oh man, like I can't wait till these two teams play each other in the AFC Championship game, which, like, by the way, is a totally fair take, but like also might not be accurate from a point spread standpoint. Now, what might not be accurate is the Colts rating right now. And I have kicked this team down to 50. I have kicked them down to completely average. I'm, you know, because I can't basically take one game and, you know, obviously the Texans tie wasn't great, but like they still moved the ball. They had the ball in the red zone like 6 times, something along those lines, right? Stuff that's indicative of like a decent team that just had kind of a weird day. Well, there was nothing weirder than that shutout loss to the Jags last week. And I don't know what happened, you know, and obviously like Matt Ryan has this history of just having atrocious games. He's going to the Hall of Fame. There should be a special wing for him, Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers as guys who, like, if you watch them play like 100 games, you would think that they were the worst quarterback you've ever seen in their lives or in your life. So, but the problem is this number should be 3.5. It was 2.5 before the season started. It was 3.5 around the time the season started. Like, this should be 3.5 based on last week. Again, last week happened, and so you bump the Colts down. But like, I can't bump them down to where they are 6.5 or 7-point underdog at home here. Especially, and again, this is part of the key to all of this. Like, do we get Shaq Leonard back on defense? Do we get Michael Pittman back on offense? Because those two guys are arguably the most important player on both sides of the ball. Not saying best, right? But we saw Jonathan Taylor was in the lineup last week, and he only had 9 carries. So he can't be the most important player on that team because he was ineffective in that game. But if they get those two guys back, which is, again, we thought we'd have at least one of them last week, but Pittman was a surprise not to go. And of course, Leonard wasn't able to get back in this game. Like, it's not necessarily now or never because the record isn't 0-2. It's 0-1-1. But this is that game where it's going to be like, oh man, they threw the kitchen sink at him, everything, and Jonathan Taylor got it going because the Chiefs' run defense, like obviously, was only okay, and all of that sort of stuff, right? The whole kitchen sink game from your boy Bill Simmons, like you have to bet on the Colts here and just live with the result, especially if you can get a flat 7 in this game. And again, we're going to hope for those guys to get back from their injuries. The Chiefs are good. They are not as good as they are being rated right now. And man, we have made an adjustment to the Colts as best we could here. But listen, we spent the last 2 weeks showing how these teams have been bottomed out in the ratings, whether it was the Cowboys last week, the Browns the week before that, where we were just going, they are being rated as low as they can possibly go.
Yeah.
Which means we have to buy low in that circumstance. And that's where we're at here. This isn't, this is a different game than the Dolphins, where it's like, well, the Dolphins actually look pretty good, and we're going to sort of buy them as significant underdogs at home to a really good Bills team. This is a different deal where it's an unnerving play here. But just look at the spread. Any spread you look at, understand that that spread exists because it's a 50-50 chance of one team covering over. Vegas and Vegas or whatever in sports books, they're not just handing out free money here by you taking the Chiefs -6.5 and like everybody just like gleefully goes to the bank with it. Because right now, we never like mention percentages or whatever, betting percentages, et cetera, et cetera. But like there have been reports from sports books that this is going to be the biggest liability of the season and maybe in a couple of years on the Chiefs -6.5. And like, keep in mind, especially if it doesn't go to 7, if it was such a liability that they were worried about this, they would go to 7 and get push money on all the Chiefs money that comes in.
Yeah. Right? No, you're totally right. And I think the biggest thing too, as I'm saying, I'm the sucker here on the Chiefs -6.5. A huge thing for anyone listening to this. If you're listening to this on Sunday morning and you go online and you see that their star receiver and star linebacker for the Colts are both in the lineup, adjust accordingly. For the people that are up there on the Sunday mornings making their moves, cool. But that's a key thing here to look for. And I'm saying that as someone who is on the Chiefs. So get it. We'll keep it moving here. We got the Eagles and the Commanders. Eagles, 6.5-point favorites in Washington. And the Eagles are on a short week. The bandwagon is strong, not quite as strong as the Bills Mafia bandwagon, but close. The Carson Wentz is still Carson Wentzing, and is this a Carson Wentz possible revenge game? I can't even say that with a straight face because I don't know what a Carson Wentz revenge game would be. It's a lot of points here, but I'm going to be on the Eagles. I know that I probably should take the points in the home dogs with the Commanders. I know that I probably should do that. But hey, early season, there's probably hard lessons for me to still learn here as the early season reminders come back. But I'm on the Eagles here, laying the 6.5 points on the road.
Yeah, I mean, evidently, I've taught you nothing for 2 years plus. I couldn't be more disappointed in you right now.
It's Carson Wentz. No, it's Carson Wentz. That's all this is.
I understand that, but you know who else is fully aware of who the quarterback is for the Washington Commanders? Odds makers and the betting market alike, right? Yep. Like, I get that it's like an uncomfortable watch with some of these guys, and it's going to be an uncomfortable watch for the Colts, and it's going to be an uncomfortable watch for the Dolphins. But again, these -6.5, like, that's your clue, right? If it was 7, what happens, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they get all the world's money on the Eagles at -7, and the Eagles win by 7, and they just have to refund all those tickets. But what's more likely going to happen if they go to 7 is that the people who are waiting to just absolutely wail away on the Commanders and getting that +7 do so. So every time this touches 7, it's going to get absolutely crushed by big time money on the Commanders. And like, okay, which side would you rather be on? The people who are willing to put big time money down, or the people who are just, coming in because they saw the Eagles on Monday night? And by the way, as much as we go, oh man, like the Eagles look good, like the Vikings had every opportunity to be in that game.
You're correct. Like, totally
that
correct.
Game was 14-7, and it felt like it was 28-7. but it was 14-7. And when it was 17-7, it felt like it was 31-7, but it was 17-7. Like what happens if they run back that field goal block, right? Amazing, by the way, that he gets caught from behind. And of course, inevitably, Kirk Cousins just starts throwing interceptions. Hell, what happens if Irv Smith catches that ball that was in his lap for a 60+ yard touchdown, right? Like I'm not making like wild, circumstances up. These are things that happened in real life. And so, yeah, like the Eagles, the situation for the Eagles was so good, like home opener on a Monday night, like made up vitriol for Jalen Reagor, right? That's just going to keep people's attention throughout the game as far as like, okay, time to boo because he's about to return a punt or something along those lines, right? Like, okay, the Bills, we rated them high to start the season. They have shown that they are appropriately rated in a high way. I think that they probably win 13 games this season, maybe 14, hell, maybe even 15. But we fade them in certain spots where they, like they have to go to Miami.
Yeah, they're not going to go undefeated.
An 8-9, 9-8-ish type team, right? That were beating up on a bad schedule and losing to good teams. They finally beat a team that we at least think is going to be good in the Vikings. They have not earned the regard that we are giving them by making them 6.5-point favorites against the Commanders. We are just taking human beings' desire to want to bet on the Eagles because of how good they looked last week. By the way, they won by 3 points against the Lions the week before. And we also don't want to bet on Carson Wentz because it hurts our eyeballs, our brains, and other regions of our bodies. And so the problem is, in order to make money in the NFL, because somewhere along the line, we decided that week 2 was, overreaction week, right? We talk about overreaction week. Oh, week 2, everybody's going to overreact to week 1, to the point where everybody kind of stopped overreacting because the people in the afternoon shows of ESPN started telling us that we were overreacting. And then week 2 would go by, and nobody calls week 3 overreaction week. We all just decide that what we saw from the first 2 weeks of the NFL season is gospel. We just decide that these teams are what we saw from the first 2 weeks. Oh, Colts are horrendous. Carson Wentz, listen, we already kind of know what Carson Wentz is, but Commanders, we're down 22-0 to the Lions. Like, they should fold the franchise. Eagles and Bills Super Bowl. Like, let's just play it tomorrow and save ourselves the time. Like, the overreaction has come from people not reacting to just one game. They've just been reacting to 2 games, which would still be ridiculous in baseball. It would still be ridiculous in the NBA, and it would still be ridiculous in the NHL, right? Like, we would be, it would be absurd of us on October 30th to understand we know everything about an NBA team, but yet we do this with the NFL. Now, again, maybe the Eagles walk in there, short week on the road, again, not exactly a far drive necessarily, but still. Honestly, I think the Commanders' crappy home field advantage kind of helps them in this circumstance, because you're going to walk out there and you're going to be like, there's nothing to this game. We are great. We're 2-0. We just beat the Vikings at home. And by the way, as much as I hope and and think that the Vikings might be better than the market thinks, and how, that showed to be the case against the Packers, we're still talking about a game against the Vikings.
Yeah.
That we're getting really excited about, right? We can't trash Kirk Cousins for being terrible in primetime and then also give credit to the Eagles for doing something impressive if we're busy talking about how crappy Kirk Cousins is in primetime, right? One of those 2 things can be true, but they both can't really be true. It has to be wow, you beat Kirk Cousins in primetime, or all you did was beat Kirk Cousins in primetime. So pick a lane there, right? Yeah. And so now we're talking about a division game with a 6.5-point road favorite here that is, to me, still largely unproven, that the public is just loving at this point. Again, it used to be week 2. Now it's week 3. We are holding our nose left, right, and center in these games. Commanders plus 6.5. And again, wait. I imagine a 7 will pop briefly at some point somewhere. Maybe have to cost you an extra 5 cents.
Yeah.
Grab it while you can, but there's a reason this isn't 7.
Okay. Fair enough. No, I totally understand where you're coming from. I will either be cursing Carson Wentz next week or just laughing at Carson Wentz, one way or the other, or maybe both. Because
honestly, that's the Carson Wentz experience.
It's true. You are correct. You are correct, my friend. We'll go through these two games a little quickly here. We've got the Texans at the Bears. Bears are 3-point favorites. I don't like it when something seems too easy and the Bears favored by 3 points against anyone seems very strange to me, especially since I love taking the Texans who cover spreads. They may not win a lot of games, but they cover spreads. Would I love to get it over a field goal? Sure, but I'll take the Texans +3.
Yeah, you're just never going to get over a field goal in this game. So grab the +3 now and just feel content with that. Again, might not win, but I think that's a good bet. Why is it 3? Honestly, from a rating standpoint, the numbers come out to -3.2 for me. So again, I at least understand why the line is what the line is.
Yeah.
I also know that, again, Justin Fields has completed 15 passes so far this season. That's not great. And I also know that the Texans running game, which I was sort of hoping would be really good this season to be able to take some of the pressure off Davis Mills, to open things up for Davis Mills. He's gone up against the Colts run defense that's actually pretty good and has been in years past. And then he went on the road against the Broncos run defense that's actually pretty good and has been in the past, right? So we're grading on the positive side of the curve. We talked about that earlier when it came to, I believe, the Browns defense playing bad teams. In this case, you've got the Texans offense facing pretty good defensive teams, especially in the run game. And Davis Mills is going to need play action passes to work, right? Yeah. And they're not going to work if you're not buying in. And so the Bears, meanwhile, reputation of a defense, we just watched them get absolutely run over by the Packers, right? That wasn't Aaron Rodgers dismantling the Bears. That was their two-headed monster of running backs dismantling the Bears. So I think this is a big game for Dameon Pierce. I think this, is a big game for Davis Mills off of the fact that Dameon Pierce is able to do some work. And again, Justin Fields has completed 15 passes all season long. So again, you're going to give the Bears -3, force them to win by more than a field goal. I just think this is Texans +3 because the ratings think that it should be, but this is actually a pretty good matchup for Lovie Smith, former Bears coach, who's going to have a little extra, if the guys like Lovie Smith, right, they're going to go to war for him a little bit here in this game. And again, by the way, they could have won that game against the Broncos last week, having a lead in that fourth quarter. Yeah, give me the Texans here +3.
I like it very much too, having a chance to win. I feel like the Saints had a chance to win last week, and then, things just kind of hit the fan in more ways than one. This week, they find themselves as 3-point favorites against the Panthers on the road. Panthers are 0-2 with losses to Jacoby Brissett's Browns and Daniel Jones's Giants. I know that might not be fair as a statement, but that's a horrible start to the season. I'm leaning on the Saints. I don't really like it. I know you're going to tell me I probably should be on the home dogs. Could this be a kitchen sink game from the Panthers? Sure, but I don't even know what a kitchen sink game from the Panthers looks like at this point.
Totally,
I will take the Saints, and I just like the Saints defense here.
Yeah, and we always talk about how they match up well against the BUCS, and that's exactly what happened. But the offense, because the BUCS defense is really good, and obviously they could have used Alvin Kamara, that was the issue, right? They just couldn't score. One touchdown to go up 7-3, might have been enough to do it, because then you don't have Jameis potentially throwing, pick sixes. And by the way, the officials absolutely dragged the BUCS into the end zone for that touchdown that sort of set that, game to 10-3. That being said, my numbers come out to 2.5 for this game. It's 3. I just have so little faith at this point in Matt Rule and the Panthers. You mentioned, I don't know if they have a kitchen sink in the kitchen. They honestly probably don't, right? That's where we're at with this Panthers team. This guy's not going to make it through the season if you can't get it done against the Browns. And then, of course, last week against the Giants, they were better on the, more yards than Giants. Obviously stuff happens. Obviously that kickoff return fumble was the thing that got them behind the 8 ball here. I hate this game. I hate everything about it. I can't rough you up here for liking the Saints, but I think if I had to, I would take the Panthers +3.
Yeah.
But God, I'm not feeling great about it at all.
Yeah, no, totally get it, my dude. Totally. No arguments here at all. Either way you want to slide being on that game. We will move on to the Falcons at the Seahawks. Seahawks are favored by 2 points. This is a weird line to me. because I wouldn't be surprised if the Falcons just won this game.
Sure.
So I guess we're just talking about home field advantage. I don't know. I mean, Geno Smith, game manager, Marcus Mariota, game manager, right? Like, give me the points. Falcons plus the points. That's where I'm leaning here.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it would be really weird because I like quote unquote liked the Falcons relative to the market before the season, as in like they were rated worst in the league, and I was like, they're not the worst in the league. Like,
wait, weren't they your Super Bowl pick? No,
that's why. And I have an unhealthy, like, irrational support for Marcus Mariota because I think he well, whatever. We don't have to get into it.
Yeah.
So it'd be really weird if I was like, well, you know what? Now let's bet on the Seahawks, a team that I thought might be the worst team in the league, right? Like, this is a team I like versus a team that I don't like. Problem is, when I crank out the numbers here, like, it's Seahawks -3. Yeah. I go, oh man, like, this thing's ticking down to like close to -1 territory. Is this something like I'm obligated to bet on the Seahawks? But it's funny, like, we don't talk about this beforehand, but you mentioned, since it's not rocket science, Seahawks home field advantage, like, it's a thing. I have them 2.5 points for home field advantage. Like, that's as high as I go for any team for home field advantage. So the fact that this is 2 does still suggest that the Falcons are the better team. And so it kind of then makes some sense here. But because the Seahawks have been given credit against the Broncos in that first game for, like, that game was under a touchdown from a pregame point spread standpoint. And then it was under 10 points against the 49ers when I thought it should be 10 points or higher. Like, the market has been giving credit to the Seahawks. And of course, they haven't been given much credit to the Falcons, who were 10.5 point underdogs last week. So when you look at it that way, you go, yeah, okay, well, the market is still trying to tell us that the Seahawks are the better team. I wasn't there before the season started. I'm not there now. The Falcons are staying out west from that game against the Rams, so you don't have that adjustment of the travel element. So maybe there's a half point, maybe a point less in the home field advantage that we're supposed to give here. I'm with you, man. I'm just sort of obligated here to sort of back my preseason opinion and my current opinion, honestly, that the Falcons are the better, more dangerous team here, even though my numbers sort of come out to like saying I probably shouldn't, and I don't think we're going to get the 3. But yeah, I mean, give me the Falcons here. We'll hope for the best.
I like it. Let's keep it moving. Sunday night football. We got the Niners as 1.5 point favorites in Denver against the Broncos. And my big question here is what I want to know what this line was before the Trey Lance injury. And it just because, like, the way that I'm looking at this and the way that I viewed this Niners season, Trey Lance gave them the more upside. We know what Jimmy G is. We know what Jimmy G is going to do. We know what he brings to the table. And so in theory, though, when I look at this game, I'm betting on the Niners for that exact reason. I know what I'm getting with Jimmy G. I know what he's going to do. He knows the system. They know the system of how they can win with him. I don't like Jimmy G at all, but he knows his role. Russ still thinks that he's here, let's riding and leading the ride. And yeah, man's Nathaniel Hackett definitely doesn't know what he's doing. So give me the Niners -1.5 Sunday night football. Let's ride.
So you're on Niners. You just let's ride it a Niners. I did.
I stole Russell Wilson's
offensive
thing.
to the Broncos.
Stole Russell Wilson's thing.
Okay, it's not going to be comfortable. This is not going to be a comfortable week. Like, that's what week 3 is. Again, it is the new week 2, right? Like, it's the old swingers scene where they're talking about, how long should it take you to call a girl after you get her number, right? And they're like, 2 days used to be a thing, but now it's like 3 days. And like, well, how long are you going to wait to call your girl? Like 8 days, right? Like, soon enough, we're going to be in overreaction week 8 at this point. But like, yeah, instead of 2 days, it's now looking like 3.
Well, when the NFL season becomes a 30-game season.
That's true. Week 8 will be officially overreaction week. Okay, so you asked about the point spread and the rating and the change for the quarterback for the 49ers. Honest to God, it doesn't make a damn difference.
Okay.
Does not make, and honestly, and so I mean, the funny thing is the path of the rating is 49ers being this like Super Bowl contender. Let's see what happens with Trey Lance. They have that game against the Bears, and therefore we have to drop their rating because they lost to the Bears.
Yeah.
And sort of were full value, if you will, for losing to the Bears. But we're also not going to take that much, into account because that was a crazy game. And that's why we were on the value with the 49ers, even though it was, again, people don't think of value as a favorite, but week 2, sometimes that's the case. And so we're on the 49ers there. I remember talking you out of the Seahawks into your 49ers, which is,
Correct.
a nice little L to a W there. And so now you go, okay, like how does that change things? And honestly, I think it might be that people are moving the 49ers back up to that rating before the season started, that Super Bowl contender rating, because obviously they were a Super Bowl contender last year. Because, again, we just talked about the Seahawks. I have 2.5 points for home field advantage for the Broncos, right? These are locations that I can actually have tangible reasons why one team plays better. Miami, Seattle, Denver. I don't have to go through why these locations are important. We are, but you've lived. So market standpoint, this is a team that was a 10-point favorite in the Broncos last week. They were a 6.5-point road favorite last week. The number based on those 2 point spreads should make them a favorite here. They should be 1.5-point favorites instead of 1.5-point underdogs. So again, 2 weeks of Nathaniel Hackett doesn't know what he's doing. Russell Wilson's a cheese ball. We love betting against him when it's
been more than 2 weeks of Russell Wilson's a cheese ball.
That's a good point. But the multiplication table of those two things sort of coming.
You set me up for that one. I'm sorry.
I did, and you knocked it out of the park, and I'm proud of you for it. I have this rated like the Broncos should be like a field goal favorite. That's not market. That's my impression of these two teams in this situation. Now, because they have 2.5 points of home field advantage, that only means I think the Broncos are a 0.5 point better than the 49ers. And that only exists until we get George Kittle back into the lineup here. But the problem is for your 49ers here, if I think it should be -3 Denver before Kittle comes back, if Kittle comes back, that's not going to move me 4.5 points to 49ers -1.5 being at least a fair price here. Add in the whole Sunday night element, right? Like you could even go a little bit higher when it comes to point spread and all of that sort of thing. And, you talked about what you're going to get with Jimmy G. Like, that's why I'm betting the Broncos. Because I know what I'm going to get.
I can't argue that point at all.
Right? And it's going to be he looks great against bad defenses. And when the timing's right. And what's our story? When Jimmy G has to think, it goes badly. Jimmy G is going to have to think against the Broncos pass rush in this game.
You're making me sad, man.
And that's going to turn into an ill-advised turnover at some point. That's going to cost them 7, maybe 14 points, something along those lines, right? That's going to be the problem. The Broncos are going to get this victory here on Sunday night, and it's going to be, I think, my 5th pick in the Circa Millions contest. What those first 4 are, I don't really know, but this is going to be my last one because I don't have much of a feel for the Monday night game enough to back one of those teams or the other, but I think you still want to talk about that game, I'm sure.
You're making me sad, man. You're making me sad. So I'm just going to move on to the Monday nighter before the reality of the situation that the Niners are in for the rest of the season just hits me in full force. So we'll just move on. Monday Night Football, Cowboys at Giants. It's Cooper Rush's time. I believe in you, Cooper Rush. No, I don't really believe in you. But give me the points and the Cowboys +2.5 because these crappy NFC East matchups, I feel like I always just take the points. But also, I'm not ready to buy the Giants just yet. Feel good moments, feel good times. I get what's going on. Your man's is looking to be like a pretty good coach, pretty solid coach. At least he has the team motivated. He's minimizing the mistakes from Daniel Jones. I get all that, but I still need to see it more in a game that if you're the Giants, you should, in theory, be okay in this game against Cooper Rush. But in the wise words of a famous New York man, we don't believe you, Giants. You need more people. So give me the Cowboys and your man's Cooper Rush.
Yeah, let's do a little fun with mathematics, right? Like we got there last week where it was like, okay, what do we think that the Cowboys are if they're appropriately 7-point underdogs at home to this Bengals team? And we if that's the case, they have to be 30 out of 100. Yeah. And we're like, okay, we can keep saying Cooper Rush as if it's the same thing as Ben DiNucci or Garrett Gilbert or that's some of these other Judes, right? But again, as we mentioned last week, all we've ever seen out of Cooper Rush is good quarterback play and wins. So put some respect on your man's name. And meanwhile, we've talked ourselves into Dak Prescott as the be all end all of quarterbacks. And anytime he leaves the game and we dare to replace him, we have to just dive bomb the team's rating from like high 50s into low 30s. Well, I think at this point we can figure out here that Cooper Rush is actually a pretty decent, serviceable backup quarterback. I'm not saying we need to sign him for a $100 million deal and like have him be the starting quarterback for some team. I'm just saying like you could be in worse spots, and a lot of teams would be in worse spots if they had Cooper Rush as their backup quarterback. So now we go, okay, what does if they're not a 30, right? Because that was crazy. And they're not a 58, which was where they were rated, around where they were rated against that BUCS team to start the season. What is their number now that they've beaten the Bengals? Let's just come up with one. You know what I mean? Something in the 40s. What do you like? Pick a number in the 40s, Shell.
43.
43. Beautiful. Okay. Well, if they're a 43 going on the road to the Giants, okay, what do we think of the Giants' home field advantage? Nah, right? Like 1, maybe 1.5, basically below the sort of average number of 1.8, 1.9 that we're going to give a team. We're going to cook that all up into our little pot here, and what comes out is Giants -1 in this game, right? But because we still don't, now Cooper Rush is going on the road, and like, the Giants are 2-0. And like, again, I painfully watched that game against the Panthers, every second of it, every single play. Again, kudos for the victory, but God, like, that game could have gone either way. It probably should have gone to the Panthers. It's why I can't bet on the Panthers this week. That's how poor of a sort of, development that was for the Panthers last week. Like, this Giants thing is largely smoke and mirrors right now. Right? Like, they're doing it without much in the way of a pass rush, or without their two, theoretical top pass rushers. Like, Saquon's doing work, but like the wide receivers, nobody knows who's good. Like, Kadarius Toney should be playing, but he's not really playing. Galladay's atrocious. Like, what are we even really talking about here with Daniel Jones and these weapons? And so, yeah, like, I'd love 3, but we're not going to get 3. We're not going to get a full 3 on the Cowboys here. So this is another one where it's like, God, at +2.5, it does feel like one where you just kind of have to bite the bullet and bet the money line. But by the way, we've talked about a lot of +2.5s here, a lot of kind of grimy +2.5s. And Shell, what's the rule on the 2.5s? Let's throw those together as +8.5 teases, right? Let's do some 6-point teases up to 8.5 on a game that's totaled under 40. I mean, that's a perfect tease on. Doesn't mean it's going to cash. Teasers have been a little sketchy this year so far. But +2.5 to 8.5 in this game with some of these other games. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have a lot of teasers tied to this game.
I get it. I gotcha. And, another great week of football, picks. My guy, Mr. Matt Russell here, blessing us, as always, with the information and education that we so crave during the NFL season. But, of course, we know my guy hits us and blesses us with even more content. And where can the people find that online, my dude?
Yeah, we don't even get to talk college football, but we do a couple of articles per week on the Score. Obviously, you can follow me at MRussAuthentic for basically retweeting anything that I write out over there. But download the Score app, and obviously, if you're in Ontario, the Score Bet as well. And then set your alerts, man. Get into the app, get into bet mode, and set your alerts so you get everything as soon as it comes out. That way you don't miss anything when it comes to pricing and line movement and all that good stuff.
It is all good stuff, and we hopefully brought you all the good stuff here. Winners, as we try to do each and every week. My name is Sheldon Alexander. You can find me online on Twitter at Shell Alexander and on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Like, follow, subscribe, On Blast, wherever you get your podcasts. And as I always say, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the On Blast Podcast, NFL Picks Edition, part of the On Blast Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, see ya.